This is It Matters, the show that digs beneath the surface of our political landscape, pop culture, and the 2024 election. I'm your host, Michael Starr Hopkins. I'm a born and bred Washingtonian who knows the ins and outs of DC. I've worked with political heavyweights from presidents to governors and members of Congress. I also write for and appear on The Hill, The Daily Beast, MSNBC, and News Nation. Now I'm bringing you prominent politicians and cultural icons, and the unfiltered truth. So buckle up and join me as we navigate this crazy world together and look at the situations that matter the most. This is It Matters. Let's dive in. All right, we've got friend of the podcast, Antjuan Seawright. How you doing, man?
Michael Starr Hopkins, it's good to see you and to be with you, and certainly to this broad, wide, deep, engaged audience that you have. And I just appreciate your friendship and for being crazy enough to invite me on this podcast.
Oh man, come on! We got to get your knowledge and kind of you help us with so much information. We're heading into this election, and so I'm gonna just get straight to it.
Yep.
Cardi B said she isn't going to vote for the president and she's not going to vote for Trump, that she's just sitting the election out. What do we do? Like, what do we do as Black people to get people to understand how important this election is?
Well, Michael, let me say this. We've all been guilty of saying this is the most important election of our lifetime. We've all been guilty of saying that in some way, shape. And truth be told, that's been a lie, because every election is important. However, I personally believe this is by far the most consequential election of our lifetime, because this election, probably more so than even Barack Obama's first and second election and the 2020 election, has more consequences than any other election that most of us have seen in modern history. In fact, you can probably venture back to the 1860s, where an election has been as consequential. And so when you hear from folks like Cardi B, when you hear from those who have podcasts, not you, when you hear from those who do have radio programs, and they say things that may be contrary to what our community needs are, what we know democracy and freedom as we know it require, it becomes frustrating. It makes my festivity level rise. And no disrespect to Cardi B, no disrespect to Charlamagne, no disrespect to Stephen A. Smith or any of those other folks, but I think we have to recenter ourselves on the fact, as I told our dear friend Wendy on her podcast, Black people casting a survival vote in this election. And so when we hear the words, I'm sitting this out, or when we hear things that are not the truth, like Joe Biden has not done anything for us, or our vote does not matter, it makes people wonder why these people saying those things when you have another group of people who are in this business arguing something totally different. And so, respectfully, I know Cardi B had her comment, and they've taken their legs and traveling in their own route.
People are taking her to task, as they should.
Well, look, I think in a real way, we have to learn to block out the noise and focus on the lyrics. And to me, that's noise. Because forget about the fact that we bled, marched, and died, and our ancestors have put it on the line in order to give us the opportunity at having the right. We've seen what our vote has gotten us from a policy perspective. Minus us showing up to vote, we would not have had a Black president. We would not have had a Black vice president. You look at this administration, the diversity and the complexion of this administration looks like communities that look like mine and yours. The fact is, $100 billion went to help save, $1 million went to help save Black and brown businesses during the pandemic, including barbershops and beauty parlors all over the country that we utilize, restaurants. When you look at $16 billion toward HBCUs, when you look at diabetes and how the impact it has in our community, the president has said, we're going to do this at $35 and for seniors. And by the way, if you reelect me, we're going to go for gold and try to do it for everyone. When you look at what we've done on policing, yes, the George Floyd Policing Act did not pass, but all the things he did by way of executive order. Michael, you and I both know this, but look, more Black people have health insurance than ever before in the history of this country. We lowered the wealth gap. The Black unemployment rate is low. I mean, we can go on and on. More Black women who look like Cardi B on our nation's highest courts. than all other presidents combined. I mean, we can go on and on and on about the accomplishments, free internet for working households. I mean, all these things. That is a direct result of the long-term advocacy and support of our community, the people that show up for Cardi B, the people that tune into Charlemagne, the people that give people like Stephen A. Smith their ratings and the juice they need to keep doing what they're doing. That's why we can't play around this election.
So why don't you think people understand the consequences? Is it a messaging failure? Are people not tuned in? Why do you think people are missing out?
Well, boring is the new sexy, unfortunately. We've experienced 4 years of political theater from the former president when that yielded no results, direct results for our community, contrary to what some may try to argue in the barbershop or the beauty parlor at the spades table. And so that's what people have gotten accustomed to. And somehow or another, they think that is political engagement. They think that's engaging our community. Not to mention, I proudly say on your podcast, Joe Biden has been the most consequential president for Black Americans in most of our lifetimes. And so I think where the disconnect happens is, one, we have to make certain that folks know they have their political deployment papers to be ambassadors for the message. I can name a number of people who benefited from the $160 billion and the 4.5 million Americans who did student loan debt. I know who got their student loan debt wiped out. I know a number of families who got those up to $7,500 a month stimulus checks that cut Black child poverty in half. I know a number of people, Michael Starr, Hopkins, that benefited from veterans who benefited from the legislation that was pushed and signed into law by the president. I know a number of people who benefited from just the fact they have a Black woman in the highest ranking office in the world, second highest ranking office in the world, who looks like them and can relate to their life experiences. So we have to make certain that we have other messengers to the message. I think we have to meet folks where they are with our message. I live by this, Michael Starr. I live by KISS, keep it simple, Seawright. So I think we by the message, because a lot of people do not do what you and I do for a living, so they may not understand the complex terms. And as Black people, we tend to run away from what we don't understand and what we fear. I think the other piece of that is we have to acknowledge pain, frustration, anger, and confusion, because that makes us relatable.
Yeah, it humanizes us.
They're out there hurting. We have to humanize this moment. While the economy is doing well, for some of us, our personal economy is not doing so well. Forget about trying to make ends meet. There are people out there putting two ends together, hoping they meet. While Black unemployment may be low, there's still brothers and sisters looking for jobs. We've closed the Black wealth gap. However, there are still people who are hurting. More Black people have health insurance, but yet there are still people in communities, in particular in rural America, where the hospital is an hour away, and the fact is people die on the way to the hospital. While more Black people own businesses than ever before in the history of this country, the Black dollar is not circulating like most people think it should. So we have to acknowledge the pain and frustration. There's still brothers and sisters who are having the fear or live in the fear that a routine traffic stop can turn into a death sentence. We have to acknowledge those things, because those things are real. But we also have to acknowledge the fact that we've made progress, but note that all progress ain't permanent, and we have to keep showing up election after election so that we can, I would say, calcify progress in our community. Because this election, unlike others, is not about the next 4, 2, or 6 years. This is about the next 24 to 46 years. And not just Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are on the ballot. My boss, a member of the greatest fraternity in the history of the world, Jeffries, being the first Black speaker of the United States, that's also on the ballot. Basic fundamental freedom and common decency is on the ballot. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, as we know it, on the ballot. Our fundamental rights that we have recently been able to enjoy as Black Americans on the ballot. The issues that Black men care about most, including economic issues, they all hang in the balance, because you and I can say this very proudly. There's not a person on the other side, and this is the binary choice, gives two flying fucks about what we care about in our community, particularly as Black men. Now, I can understand you're frustrated with the Democratic Party.
Absolutely.
And it's easy to be angry, and it's easy to vote against something than it is to be for something. But we also have to know what comes along with not voting in this election, Cardi B. We have to know what comes along with voting third party, remind the three extremists on the nation's highest court, because a lot of people voted third party in 2016. We have to be knowledgeable about the fact that what comes along with voting for Donald Trump just in the form of a protest vote. Those things are very dangerous to our community.
There's not a lot of people that look like us, men especially of color, in politics, in comms positions. How do we start to groom more young black men, young black women, more people of color who can go out and be messengers? Because, I often, when I look around the room, there's only a couple of us. And when we look at the messaging and some of the talking points and the things that are said, it's a result of there not being people like us in the room to put context and color. How do we correct that?
Well, it's twofold. One, we have to make sure that we teach people in our community, men and women, that running for office is not the only way to have power and influence. We've gotten zapped and zoomed to think if I'm not in elected office, or if I'm not in those visible jobs, i.e. a commentator on TV or giving commentary to an article and so forth, then my voice don't matter. That's bullshit. We've got to move away from that. Secondly, we've got to teach people about the opportunities that exist in the political ecosystem, from digital engagement, online engagement, to being influencers, to traditional comms as we know it, to doing the advertising part, the pushing out the message, or to being someone without a quote-unquote title in politics, but just doing what everyday people have the most power to do, and that's influence their own families, their own communities, their own households, their own towns, their own cities, their own states, and eventually their own countries. That's what we've got to condition ourselves or reimagine ourselves doing as individuals first, because it all starts with us as individuals. I don't need a title to go tell people that I know people who benefited from student loan debt relief brought to you by Joe Biden. I don't need a title to remind folks that Donald Trump is the biggest existential threat that we've seen in most of our lifetimes, and our grandparents would be trembling in their grave if that's where they are, if they knew that this guy, 91 indictments, has the potential of being the leader of the free world again. I don't need a title to do that. I can share that in my information circle the same way I share when Jordans are getting ready to come out, when a new makeup line is getting ready to come for the ladies, when a new clothing line is getting ready to drop, when a new album by Cardi B is getting ready to drop. I can share those things without having a title.
What do you think a Trump presidency looks like? I had Sean Spicer on the show, and he tried to somehow convince me that I shouldn't be afraid of a Trump presidency. I'm terrified. What do you think a Trump presidency looks like?
Well, I'm 39 years old, Michael. I'm from South Carolina. I'm black, as you know, and I'm a Democrat.
All things we're fans of.
There are very few things I worry about because I know my family's history. I know our communities. But I am very concerned about a Trump presidency. And the reason I'm not worried is because we are resilient people. We've demonstrated time after time we refuse to die. In spite of the roadblock, challenges, obstacles, and the things that folks put in our way who do not want to see us at the table but have bet their life experiences on we will always be on the menu. So I'm not worried. I am concerned. And the reason I'm concerned is if you Google Project 2025,
yes,
that is the roadmap for what a Trump presidency will look like. When his kids get on national TV and say, we need people in the federal government who think like my father, forget about whether you like Joe Biden or not. Forget about whether you agree with Kamala Harris or not. Forget about whether you embrace the Democratic Party or not. That should scare the shit out of everybody.
Talk about Project 2025, because I think that's really what should keep everyone awake at night. Like, that's the shit that just they're telling us what they're going to do. The blueprint is there. They're telling us what they want to do. And it's like most of America just isn't paying attention.
Well, and that's the problem. We pay attention to the wrong things. If it was a Drake and whomever beefing in that game, then that would grab all of our attention. But if you tell somebody to Google Project 2025, they say they ain't got time for that. Or I got other things to do. Or I don't really understand. Or I don't need to know that. or my vote don't count. And so Project 2025 to me is a right-wing extremist manifesto, which ultimately is a roadmap to say this is what we're going to do, not if, but when we get power. And they're saying when because they expect us not to show up. They expect us not to be engaged. They expect us to choose the couch or third party or even them in this election because, it's more easy to be angry than it is informed. And so they've already had their plan about what they're going to do. It's almost like the blueprint for building a house. That's their blueprint, put together by this right-wing extremist group, the Heritage Foundation, and they're basically going to exterminate democracy and freedom as we know it and do their best to exterminate the needs, concerns, aspirations, fears, and hopes of black and brown Americans as we know it. And so that's what Project 2025 is about. I think my party has to do a better job of elevating and amplifying the attention around it and what's in that document. It's almost like when you go to the bank or you go to a car dealership or so forth, they tell you very quickly, sign here at the bottom, and if you want to, read all the things in between. So the devil details, the fine print. We've got to learn how to stop just reading the headlines and read the fine print because it is the fine print that has defined our journey in this country for hundreds and hundreds of years. And on that note, for 400 plus years in this country, Michael, we've been neglected, forgotten about people. That will not change in one election cycle. And so that's why we have to treat voting as an exercise. The same way you go to the barbershop every week or 2 weeks or however often we go to get updated. That's how we've got to be voting. The ladies who go to the nail salon or the beauty parlor, same way. The same way you mow your grass in the summer, you can't just mow it one time and think your problems go away. The same way you go to church, you can't just show up on Easter Sunday.
Some of us can. Some of us.
Don't worry. We've got to.
He knows my heart. He knows my heart.
That's right. That's right. That's right. So that's where I'm at on. That's where I'm at on that.
Yeah, I mean, Project 2025 includes things like mass deportations. They want to round up all undocumented immigrants and put them into literal camps while they deport them. I mean, we're talking about millions and millions of people. It would allow them to fire millions of government workers and basically remove the institutions of government that protect us, like the Civil Rights Bureau. It goes so far to talk about overturning the Civil Rights 1965 Act. I mean, this is like scary shit. And we got people talking about they're both Trump and Biden are equally as bad. Like, what do you say to that?
Did you hear the former president the other day when he talked about he felt like white people, I think white men, have been mistreated in this country, and he's going to fix that?
I heard. I heard. I'm not going to say who it was, but I was in a green room for a show, and I had an entire conversation with a Republican who made the case that white men are under attack and they've been feminized by Democrats and the Democratic agenda. And really, it's white men who need to be built back up because everything since the 60s has made them a villain.
Look, that sounds very fluent and privileged. and that's what, but that's what we're up against. And that's the potential that rides on this election. That's why our turnout is so important.
I mean, they're talking about putting up Tim Scott. Like, what?
I ain't even talking about putting up Tim Scott. They're trying to use Tim Scott as a flirtation tool to lure people away from the realities that we're trying to fix, and they want to make even more hard. That's what's so frustrating. That's what's so scary.
Well, it's frustrating when you see, I get the line's always shorter on the other side. If you're a black Republican, you know, the ascent is always quicker. But I know black Republicans who are principled Republicans, and I know black Republicans who are just there to climb the ladder quickly. And look, we come from good stock. Our ancestors worked hard to get us here. And when you see people willing to set us back, you're talking about Trump getting 10% of the black vote. How do you even fathom that? There'll
be 34.7, I think it is, eligible African American voters, 34.1. That's up 7% from the 2020 election. Eligible African American voters to participate in this election. We have the opportunity to shape our community, the country, the Congress, the Constitution in the next 50 to 60 years if we not just show up and vote, but we vote our interest. There's nothing on that ballot, third party, fourth party, second party, other than Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, that by and large represent our community, our interests, our needs and concerns, and the future of this country. And even if you don't vote for yourself, vote for your friend who you know is struggling and going to need the help. Even if you don't like Joe Biden, even if you don't love Joe Biden, like your country and your community enough to know that a vote for Joe Biden is a vote against those who are trying to take away basic things that you enjoy. And if you don't think that they are going to take this stuff away in this next election, all you have to do is read Project 2025, but look at what they've done in the United States Congress. Every chance they get, they've tried to roll back the winds of progress. Think about this, Michael Starr. A woman or a child, a little girl born today has less rights and say-so over her body than her parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents in some cases. And think about this. No one imagined 50-something years ago that we would even be having this conversation. No one imagined when the Voting Rights Act was passed, our grandparents and great-grandparents couldn't even think about the fact that slowly over time, those rights that they had to work so hard to secure have been eaten away over time, and we're almost back to the bare bones. And if we're not careful, that can be yanked away. Think about diversity, equity, and inclusion as we know it.
Mm-hmm. Which Republicans just shut down in the House. They shut down the DI office.
Being taken away. And you know why those things have happened? Is because in 2016, when we had the most qualified person to ever run for the office run versus the most unqualified person to think about the office in Donald Trump run, people voted for Trump, 13% of black men. Mm-hmm. We had people vote third party. Mm-hmm. We had some people in the Democratic Party who did not go as hard for Secretary Clinton as they should have because of their own reasoning and agenda. And so you had some set the election out. And as a result, the next 50 to 70, perhaps 100 years at the nation's highest court will be ruled by right-wing extremists who don't give two flying kites about what happens to our community when they make these rulings. If you pissed off by student loans because you didn't get what you thought you were going to get, even though we've done $160 billion in student loan debt relief, well, it was the right-wing activist court and the Republicans who took that away, not Joe Biden.
I mean, when you look at the courts, I think that's where people really forget how much power has been vested. I mean, they have the ability, as we saw in Bush v. Gore, to decide elections. They have the ability to strip us of rights. What do you think a court looks like under another Trump term? I mean, I would imagine there's a good chance that Thomas and Alito would step aside, which would cement a 6-3 legacy.
Well, unless something changed, the current structure, I would say political structure, even though that's probably not the best term to use, but the current ideology structure of the court will remain because of that 2016 election. Trump put 3 people on the court. Those are lifetime appointments. If you look downstream at some of the lower courts at the federal level, he put people on the courts, Michael Starr, who in some cases did not even walk into a courtroom to try a case.
The judge who is now handling his case down in South Florida, Cannon, she had no judicial experience beforehand and ended up now handling his confidential documents case.
So that is a flirtation about what could come of our courts in the next 50 to 60 years if these people get power. And it's not just the presidency. It's the Senate who has to confirm these judges. That's why it's so important. We've got to be able to block and tackle in this next election.
Hakeem Jeffries has the chance to be the first Black House Speaker in our nation's history. I mean, that the achievement in and of itself would be historic and amazing. But what would it mean to you to have watched his ascent, to have worked with him? Talk about kind of your background and seeing the things that you have seen come to pass.
Well, it's a reminder of what consistency looks like. It's also a reminder that how we've got to be prepared, and we've got to prepare the next generation of leaders. Without Jim Clyburn, there would be no Hakeem Jeffries. And so because of the foundation that's been laid by Jim Clyburn for a very long time, who's the highest ranking African American in the United States Congress, pathway.
The reason that Joe Biden is president.
I'll let you say it.
The reason that Joe Biden is president.
But that's the reason Jeffries will be able to glide to the speakership if we come out to vote in November. So it's going to be an emotional, it'll be an emotional thing when it happens, because not just a black speaker, but a black man, a black man who's qualified, a black man who's a Kappa man, a family man, a good man, a Christian man, a man who understands the challenges of his community, but a man that even if you may not like him, you respect him, a man from the People's Republic of Brooklyn. And as they say in New York, if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. So I know he can make it in the United States Congress as a speaker, but more than anything, a man who understands the importance of inclusion and keeping the various four corners of the square together. A man, arguably, who, even though he's not the speaker, the leader of the House, has been able to, from the minority, influence what happens with the majority. I think that's the greatest sign of a leader. Michael Starr Hopkins, when Barack Obama was first elected, one of the things he said early on in his conversations with the public, he said, when Jim Clyburn speaks, the entire Congress listens. I believe in my heart, if Barack Obama had to rehearse that or recite that again, he would probably say, when Jim Clyburn speaks, the entire country listens. But when Hakeem Jeffries leads, the tectonic plates politically shift, because that's what you see happening in real time. And this election won't just give Jeffries the opportunity to be speaker, being African American. We could have an assistant speaker in a black man from Colorado, 40 years old, Joe Neguse, a black woman, the youngest black woman elected to Congress since Shirley Chisholm, and the first black woman to House leadership since Shirley Chisholm. Lauren Underwood has the potential to return to House leadership in a majority situation where she's on the DPCC now. I mean, there are a number of opportunities that will come as a result of if we show up to vote, and representation really does matter.
When we vote, we win. We have the power to shape the electorate, shape the country, and we're seeing a new generation of African American leaders emerge. What does Congressman Clyburn mean to you? What's he mean to the country? You've had a unique relationship with him, and you know him so personally. Talk about him.
He's my political father.
Yeah.
And a lot of the success I've had in Washington, D.C. and around the country is a direct result of his leadership, his mentorship. And I probably wouldn't be on this podcast minus him making certain that I have opportunities to display my God-given gifts and talents. And if Jim Clyburn will go down as the most consequential black American, or perhaps American, to ever serve this country. The President's Medal of Freedom was just a slight indication of the power of his network and his net worth to the country, to the Congress, and to the Constitution. I'm grateful that I have had the opportunity to work alongside him to learn the game, but also to influence the game.
You see his fingerprints all over Congress, but especially that new generation of leaders. Talk about what the makeup of kind of the Neguse, Congressman Neguse, and the Lauren Underwoods, and what you see on the horizon.
Well, if it goes right, we will have 60 plus members of the Congressional Black Caucus come January of next year. The highest has ever been in the history of this country. Started out with 13, we would go 60 plus. That's a direct result of, one, the people showing up to vote election after election, but the Jim Clyburns, the Maxine Waters, the Barbara Lees, the Benny Thompsons, the Marsha Fudges, laying the foundation so these younger members will have the opportunity to come in and lead right away. And because the Congress is certainly not in a training ground. You have to come in and be able to perform right away because the American people are depending on that. And that's why it's so important for our more seasoned leaders to make certain the next generation leaders are prepared to lead. And I think you're seeing that in real time play out.
There's always this period of pendulum swinging. So we had the election of Barack Obama, and then we had the, election of Donald Trump. It now really feels like we're in this period where there's a lot of white fear and white resentment around the fact that our country is becoming more demographically different. It's becoming more brown. Its languages are becoming more vast. It is a changing country. How do we go about bringing the country back together? Because at a certain point, inflection points happen, and it feels like we're getting even more dangerously close to an inflection point. January 6th was clearly one. But with an upcoming election, what do we do?
Well, the complexion of this country is changing. The browning of America is happening right before our eyes. And along with that comes challenges, but it becomes real opportunities. Some of the biggest challenges are there are people who don't look like the complexion of the country that's changing, who fear that they will no longer have the power and influence they have over those black and brown people that are shifting the narrative and shifting the demographics of this country. The other part to that is there are people who cannot process and digest that. So the easiest thing for them to do is to act out. That's why you see white nationalism, white supremacy, Christian white nationalism, bigotry, and hate at an all-time high. These keyboard thugs on the internet, all-time high. White supremacy, all-time high. Because the fear of the rug being pulled out from under them is happening in real time. And so with that, I think we have to make sure as black Americans, because I can't speak for other communities, that we stay locked in at the hip. And we not let people divide us, black men versus black women versus black men. Our shared power has come in our collective power. When black men and black women rise together, the young and the not so young, that's when we've had success in this country. When the whole divide and conquer strategy was implemented by the white slave mentality so that we can be divided to make certain that we do not rise. And we've got to get back to the basics in our community. And part of that means yelling in the places we agree and whispering in the places we disagree. And you don't always have to fight these battles out loud. We've always had opportunities to do things behind the scenes, if you will, or when the lights are not shining so bright and work out so we show a united front. Now I get it. There's a generation of people being influenced by the internet. There's a generation of people being influenced by being an influencer. And intention becomes the most powerful drug out there in the ecosystem, especially when you add social media. But we also have to know the dangers and challenges that come along that for our people in our community.
We're not that far from an election, and we've got a former president who, under his administration, saw over 1 million Americans die. He mismanaged COVID. He mismanaged race relations. He attempted a coup on our government. He still refuses to acknowledge an election. But yet we know that tens of millions of Americans are going to vote for him. How is it that this election is still so close? And what does that say about us as a country, that he is not only an option, but if the election was today, could potentially win?
Well, it says that we have work to do. And it says that all progress ain't permanent, as I said a couple of times here. And it also says that not all skin folk ain't kinfolk. Because black Americans that put this scenario in real-time play.
Yeah.
It also says there are people who depend on us not to be engaged and showing up. And that's in their If you're a Black American, especially a Black man, can you imagine having 91 counts?
No. He says that's why. He says that's why he's going to get more support, though, because
we couldn't even get a job interview if we had a weed charge. Highest job in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Is a few months potentially away of having that job because there are people who may not understand the dynamics that come along with it. So it says we got work to do. Mm-hmm. It also says that we, those of us who work in democratic politics, have to understand that people are not paying attention in the same ways as they used to, and there are a lot of things competing for our time. And so we can't just say Trump is bad, he's racist and all that. We've got to give people a reason to show up. And I think that has to be part of the strategy moving forward over the next 5 to 6 months.
It's going to be really interesting because you're right, they're counting on us not showing up, on African Americans, especially African American men not showing up, because they do know when we show up, not only do we win, but we win by huge majorities. And I'm scared. I'm not gonna lie. I'm really nervous at this point because with things as close as they are, we have no idea what's going to happen in the fall, and the stakes are so high. I mean, to think that my grandparents were the first integrated high school class in DC. And DC was the first city to integrate. And to think that my grandmother is alive and has now watched Roe versus Wade overturned. She's watched potentially the Civil Rights Act signed and then parts of it broken down and potentially now it being repealed. We had a Black president and now we basically have white supremacists for a president. It's a scary time. And what is your message to not just Black voters, but Americans in general, Republicans included, that just, I get that people are scared. And I had this conversation with Spicer. Everybody's scared. We're all scared of our neighbors because of the way conversations are. But how do we figure out some sort of like common ground?
In the words, paraphrasing Loretta Lynch, we may read from different books of the Bible. We may call our gods by different names. But we all are Americans. And we care about the future of this country. And I'm paraphrasing Loretta Lynch. We've got to figure out there's some things that we've got to help have clarity around. There's some things that are non-debatable. Democracy and freedom are non-debatable. Basic fundamental rights are non-debatable, whether you're Black, white, Democrat, or Republican. Your economic bill of health and that being successful, non-debatable. Access to affordable quality health care, non-debatable. There's some things just non-debatable.
Yeah.
And we've got to get back to the posture where there's no compromise. Defending democracy and our allies and partners, non-debatable, including Ukraine. We've got to get back to that. We've got to straighten our postures a bit because we've let a few loud people seem like they're the majority, and that has controlled the political temperature out here in every ecosystem or every corner of the American political square. And we've tried to sweep so many things under the rug like racism, bigotry, and hate, to generations of Americans continue to trip over those things and fall. And that's why we're bleeding externally and internally. And people see the blood. We've got to do some things different. So I think it's going to take a generation of leaders who don't care about what party label you subscribe to. They care about the principles. They're not looking for likes and retweets. They're not looking for political theater, but they're looking to influence policy that changes the game for everyone. Think about the 1960s when we were fighting for things, basic fundamental things that we rightly deserve. We had to fight for them. Even though every Republican wasn't on board, every Republican eventually fell into this idea that these things are not up for discussion.
Yeah.
Fair housing, clean drinking water, and so forth. And we've made progress, but minus Joe Biden, $80 billion to remove lead pipes from every community, those things will still be there. Minus Jim Clyburn and his advocacy, access to affordable quality internet in every community would not be a reality. Our veterans who keep us safe at home and abroad, minus them having a president in Joe Biden who understands that we needed a PAC Act to make sure they get their benefits, we wouldn't have it. Minus a president understanding the development that HBCUs has brought to the table, $16 billion in investments, wouldn't be there. I mean, I can go on and on about things that this president has prioritized. Think about Breonna Taylor. Mm-hmm. Look what the president did, banning chokeholds at the federal level, banning no-knock warrants. No other president had to deal with that and did deal with that. Student loans. I mean, look, making things at home again. We saw what this pandemic did for us. Cut black child poverty in half, Michael Starr. Cut black child
We need you to be the messenger. We need to put you out there every day on TV giving this message, because this is what people need to hear.
It's sad and disgusting. Look, executive order on child care to make it affordable. Think about how many single black moms out there, or even moms, period, mm-hmm. black or white, suburban, rural, or urban, are dealing with the reality and the high cost of child care. Think about that.
How do you keep hope? How do you keep your hope? Like you go through this every day. You see how the sausage gets made. You see how ugly it can be. How do you manage to keep hope? Because I know it's tough sometimes.
Well, hope is our superpower. Mm-hmm. And when we didn't have anything else as Black Americans, we had faith and we had hope. And most time those two things traveled together down the road less traveled by. And so that's the thing I grab onto. Look, Michael, I've been blessed. I am the grandson of sharecroppers from rural South Carolina. My mother and father did not go to anybody's college, but they were better than my grandparents because at least they could spell college. Only in America that a story like mine is possible. A little round, chubby, nappy-head boy from rural South Carolina to be able to come on a podcast like this and tell the story that the American people need to hear. Only in America that's possible. So if I've seen the journey and I'm a prime living example of the journey and the benefits of the journey, then anything is possible.
Antjuan Seawright.
Michael, look, you and I were a part of making certain that a black man was the leader of the free world.
Yeah.
And we played a role in making certain that a black woman was the second highest in command in the free world. Our grandparents and great-grandparents never had the audacity to pray for that to happen. They just wanted us to have basic fundamental freedoms and a better quality life than they had. And look what has happened. That's our hope.
I want you to know you always you have a standing invite here. And as we get closer to the election, I hope you'll come back because your voice is not just needed, but it's valued. And I appreciate you. And so.
Well, I appreciate your friendship. Yeah. In our business, jealousy sometimes outweighs friendship. And I just appreciate you being an authentic brother.
Absolutely.
Occupying your lane, doing your thing, because your thing is needed and necessary, just like the next brother's thing is needed and necessary. We all play a role, and I appreciate you venturing in your role in a real, authentic way.
Thank you, man. There is room for all of us, and I want all of us to eat. That's what I always say. I want all of us at the table. I want all of us eating. Antjuan Seawright, you are the man. I appreciate you, and stay blessed.
Thank you.
Thanks for being with me today. Share this episode with others, like and review it, and please keep learning all you can so that you can make an informed voting decision this year. Come back next week for more Truth in Politics. I'm Michael Starr Hopkins, and this is It Matters.